Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Safeguard Your Business Cybersecurity Protection with Chris Shalda and Chris Barnes from Cortex Services. During today's session, we will be discussing how the latest technologies can provide your business with built-in protection. My name is Ashley Menke, and I will be moderating today's session. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to address. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to you after the session. If you have any questions during the session, you can enter them in the question box or ask them during the Q&A session at the end. We will follow up the webinar with next steps for you to take Safeguard to your business, and additional information can be found at cortexservices.com.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. First, I guess we should introduce ourselves. So my name is Chris Shalda. I am Microsoft Solutions Architect for Cortex Services. Little background from me is I've been in IT for almost going on 10 years now, been actually with Cortex for all 10 of those years. Started out as a consultant in kind of core infrastructure and doing a lot of activities around cloud in the smaller medium businesses up to medium-sized businesses to some of the largest enterprises and most complex projects that we've had. And recently I've become our Solutions Architect for our Microsoft team, and kind of helping customers understand what technologies they have, where they want to go with their business needs, and kind of putting all the pieces together with a holistic approach. So I really get the pleasure of working with a lot of different customers these days from all different sizes, from 10 users to 200,000 user size organizations. So I'm really glad to be here. Chris?
Sure. My name is Chris Barnes. I'm our Microsoft Delivery Manager here at Cortex. So I've been at Cortex here for going on a year and a half. I've been in the IT industry for a little over 15 years, and I've been in consulting here for a little bit, but spent most of my time on the client side in a variety of verticals, from helping managing consulting companies to retail to automotive and manufacturing. So what I do at Cortex, so I help manage and am responsible for project delivery for all of our Microsoft projects. And that is anything from our Office 365 projects, Windows 10 deployments, Active Directory migrations, SCCM, Intune, EMS, so really anything across the Microsoft stack.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. And this seems to be a Chris and Chris show, so it's going to be a little confusing, but hopefully you can tell us differently, tell us apart. Yeah, I'm going to be going through a lot of these the topics here today and kind of leading conversation, and Chris is going to jump in a couple areas where he has some expertise and show some demos and get a little bit deeper in terms of the technology. So what we want to cover today, and we're going to try to keep this under an hour, and we're going to leave some time for Q&A at the end, of course, as well. We want to talk about today's security landscape and what's different, why things have changed, and what you need to do about it. Hardware-rooted trust, kind of talking about where Windows 10 comes into play and where that can really help with these the security landscape today. How you keep your identity secured, and then some of the cloud-enabled security options that are out there today that actually have a very big impact on mitigating a lot of these modern attacks. We'll go into Q&A and give you a little bit of information on how to contact us if you want to know some more information. So let's get started here. So many of your organizations you work for may have already deployed some of those best-in-class security solutions, point solutions here and there. But the thing is, the security landscape has really changed, and those traditional solutions, typically we see they have a lot of gaps. They're not as integrated, they don't overlap with other technologies, there's a lot of different consoles, there's information that's that you get about threats is fragmented, and it's hard to correlate all that information. Things like FireEye, they can't provide you with the protection that you need across the board, but in some areas it's wonderful. The security landscape really, in the last 3 years, I think, has made it that we need to start looking at security a little bit differently than we've done traditionally. And honestly, we're in a revolution of cyber threats. These are happening more and more often, and for reasons that are different than they were a few years ago. A lot of it having to do with monetary gains, even. And we're seeing even a lot of organizations with the largest security budgets and dedicated elite security analysts, they're just struggling to keep up with these modern threats and dealing with them. Oftentimes, you know, they'll be able to block and tackle the attack with maybe some options like FireEye, but oftentimes that's only after the breach occurs, and we all know how long that could take before anybody even notices. I think on average now it's about 180 days on average that an organization will realize that they've been breached, and on average another 80 days after that before they're able to fully eradicate the attacker, because they don't know where it's coming from or what holes to plug. So yeah, just looking at some of which, I mean, some of these organizations have unlimited budgets, but they still are having trouble struggling with these types of breaches. So the evolution of attacks, this kind of gives you a little bit of a timeline of where things started. You know, 2003, 2004 time frame, it was just people trying to mess around with mischief. You know, these what you call script kiddies. They throw out blasters, slammers. They're just trying to, not really trying to gain anything necessarily, but just trying to cause some problems. Maybe deface websites, attacking computer systems, that type of thing. This is like XP time frame, right? So then we start getting into more of like targeted attacks, where organized crime is really coming to this, into the fold here. And these attacks are becoming more sophisticated. You're starting to see things like ransomware, this click fraud, identity theft, starting around the 2005 time frame, right? So that was kind of around Vista's time frame. That's when certain aspects of Microsoft implemented because of what was happening those days, like UAC and BitLocker. But yeah, you're starting to see a lot less of those script kiddies and really these organized crime trying to make money by monetizing this cyber crime. And they might even do that on the consumer side of the house, where they use ransomware to encrypt your personal documents and family photos, and all you have to do is, you know, pay them a couple $100s to get it back, and everybody continues to pay the money to get these things back, and it just proliferates these attacks. So it's become more sophisticated, they're more targeted over time, and the attackers have incrementally kind of increased their take from what they're making from this. So now let's talk about just like 2012 and beyond. This is where things are starting to really change. Nation states, activists, terror groups. Microsoft really started to see a big shift where these nation states and even terror groups started to be involved in these cyber attacks against the private sector. And these attacks from these actors are absolutely brazen and include the highest levels of sophistication. Now, in this case, their motives were different from what we've seen in the past, and they seem to be increasingly focused on damage and destruction rather than just mass IP theft. So we're really truly in the area where the costs of getting breached aren't as fuzzy as they used to be. These are easily quantified, and they are affecting the balance sheet of organizations. So all that being said, let's kind of go through an anatomy of attack of what is it, I'd say more of the typical attacks that we might see that unfortunately seem seemingly very effective, even though it's so simple. So here's kind of how the attacks start. It's not just vulnerabilities in server infrastructure running on the edge of your network that you need to worry about, maybe not patching it or something like that. We've gotten pretty good at addressing that, right? The risk we really need to focus our attention on is our users. And they can be hacked more easily than their devices through deception. So for instance, they can be tricked into inputting sensitive information such as a username or password into a fraudulent website that remarkably looks like their corporate website. And some studies have shown that they can be tricked into high percentages, around 75% in some cases. So basically what happens is they might receive an email seemingly innocuous, right, from their organization. It looks like it's coming from inside the organization. It lures them to a malicious website that either tricks them into installing malware, or it leverages a vulnerability in the browser to install it behind the scenes, and the users have no idea that this is happening. So once that happens, maybe the malware purposely causes the device to misbehave in order to generate a call to the help desk. You call the help desk, hey, something's going on with my computer. Well, the help desk then logs into the device, and the attacker's hoping that they'll do this. They usually have some sort of admin credentials, or at least elevated credentials. So once they get to that device, that attacker almost will certainly have increased levels of privilege across the network. And now they've stolen that identity, they can laterally move across the network with increased privileges, and you're owned at that point. That is a matter, going to be a matter of minutes or hours where that can actually happen. And then from there, like I said, they use the credentials to get across the network to different servers, to data, to applications, whatever resources they want. They can essentially just start shopping around for data within your network that could be sensitive. So stopping this can be very difficult, and at the very least, at the very minimum, it'll take a lot of time to do that with our traditional methods of security. So I mean, this is just one example of this, and now we're going to talk about a little bit about how do you address those threats and where Microsoft has helped with that too. So really you need to defend against these modern security threats in a few ways here. We're going to look at secured devices, securing the identities, threat resistance, and information protection. It's really the full pie, let's say here, the full puzzle that you need to be addressing to really fully secure your organization. So we're going to start with secured devices, and Windows 10 has really been designed from the ground up with these modern security threats in mind in order to provide security, prevent the attacks, and also have a little bit more of those threat resistance and be able to also find out if something has happened quicker in terms of a breach. So let's start with that, and it really comes down to ensuring that the hardware itself is being able to is trusted in a way that you can secure identities and other information. Now, in the world of Windows 7, for the most part, platform security was based entirely on what software could do on its own. And so once malware compromises a key system component, it basically could hide out and compromise the entire system, even embed itself into the hardware itself. So with Windows 10, what they've done is Microsoft has taken advantage of the latest security-related hardware innovations to address hardware level tampering. This is key to have a modern device that has this type of hardware built into it in order to provide UEFI and not BIOS, in having secure boot and other types of firmware to ensure the device integrity. It also takes advantage of the Trusted Platform module, which provides hardware-based cryptographic services. So essentially, it's isolated and secure isolation of like all the secrets and sensitive data that you might have on your device that can ensure that that's being only the trusted parts of the operating system can get access to that. Biometrics is another thing that we're starting to see. Windows 10 is built for biometrics to help with multi-factor authentication in various ways. Virtualization, that's another piece, very brand new, being built into the operating system ground up in order to separate some of the key components within the operating system to keep the most sensitive parts separate from other areas. So I'm kind of turn this over to Chris here to explain kind of where things have been with the operating systems, where they've gone with Windows 10, and where that helps us protect.
Sure. So I'm going to go into a new feature with Windows 10 here. It's called Virtualization-Based Security, or VBS. So you've probably seen VBS before, talking about the virtual basic scripting, where now it's going to be virtualization-based security, now that PowerShell's probably replaced all of your VBS scripts, hopefully. All right, so one of the best ways to understand the power of VBS is to understand the challenge we face today. So the image you see here, it represents how things have traditionally been in our client operating systems. You have the OS, it's running on top of hardware, and then you have apps that are running on top of the OS. So the problem we face with this stack is that any vulnerability at any level will enable an attacker to gain control of the components they're running on top of. So there's no separation. For instance, if I found a vulnerability in the browser, I may be able to take control of the operating system and thus everything else on the device. So to address this problem, in the past, Microsoft has added defenses to make it hard to exploit vulnerabilities, but the reality is that attackers are always going to find new techniques to bypass the latest defenses. As a result of solving the problem, it requires a different approach. So the approach is to dramatically change the architecture of the platform and use virtualization technology as a means to fully isolate some of those most sensitive Windows capabilities from the rest of the operating system, which we have to assume will be breached. Once isolated, these functions have a shot at remaining secure even when an attacker or malware has taken admin control of the OS. So if we take a look here at the diagram, and a little bit different, you still have your apps running on top of your Windows platform services that sit on top of the kernel. However, now using virtualization-based security, you use the built-in hardware-based virtualization capabilities of the newer chipsets that everybody should have out there to isolate in what's called a VSM, so a virtualization-based security environment. And then you've got a separate kernel, and you have what are called trustlets that run on top of there that are protected based on hardware that the operating system can only interact with via certain protected APIs. So a couple trustlets we're going to be talking about today are going to be Device Guard, Credential Guard, and then there's some new things we may be able to get into that where you're actually going to have the Edge browser in this next version of Windows 10, so the Creators Update coming out here in a couple of months, where you'll even be able to have untrusted zone websites running in a trustlet here, so that if something is infected in there, it literally has no ability to move laterally or to exploit any code to get anywhere. It's a sandbox session. So
yeah, so for here, I mean, so it really comes down to there's new challenges here and they require a new platform. Most of the organizations that we work with, they still are on majority of Windows 7 if they haven't started to get into Windows 10 already. You know, adding a Windows 8 out there, 8.1, but it's truly the vast majority is Windows 7. But as threats are more mature now and they're targeted against companies in response, and in response security needs, they really need to be considered and implemented from the ground up, and that's where Windows 10 really comes in. And I'm just going to scroll through these really quickly, but some of the things that, you know, UEFI Secure Boot, although you could do that with 64-bit Win 7, that wasn't really adopted very much across the world here. And TPM 2.0 is a little newer, that when Windows 7 came out, TPM 2.0 wasn't even really a spec at that point. And all these virtualization capabilities, these are all, again, these are deeply embedded into the operating system from Windows 10. It's built upon that, and it really helps you isolate the malware from the protected operating system. And secured identities wise, password theft was increasingly successful with Windows 10, and multi-factor solutions were very complex. We'll show you a little bit of that later on. And this is where Microsoft Hello, Microsoft Passport, you'll hear, or Windows Hello for Business as well, is they're changing the name on that one. That comes into place and helps you have a viable alternative to passwords. Then there's information protection. Sure, you'd have disk encryption, but that would sometimes be difficult to deploy on Windows 7. You might have third-party solutions or DLP. Now, disk encryption can be enabled right out of the box with Windows 10, just seamlessly. There's the DLP in Windows that's built in, and it's even better with Azure and in Office. So these things are all now coming with Windows 10 built in. Threat resistance to Device Guard, like Chris mentioned earlier, is something that helps isolate and only allow trusted applications to run. And Windows Defender is becoming this large suite of capabilities beyond just the antivirus and malware that most people might be familiar with. So in general, you'll see a lot of these here are dependent on the first couple pieces, UEFI Secure Boot and TPM 2.0. Right. So, but at this point in time, not most companies aren't there yet. Right. I'd say the most important is UEFI. Yep. But yeah, but we've seen customers have a lot of questions about how do they get there, and it's been difficult up till now. Right.
Yep. Sure. And we've got a lot of experience with multiple different large organizations going to Windows 10, and one of the biggest blockers for them typically is getting to UEFI, where it's proven challenging from an administrative effort standpoint to, today to get to UEFI, if you have a Windows 7 machine that's running BIOS, and BIOS is, I think it just celebrated its 30th birthday here recently, so you can rest assured that it's almost impossible today to fully secure a machine that's running BIOS. So you do want to get to UEFI, and that's been some of the biggest challenge. It's the biggest driver for people to get to Windows 10. It's also been the biggest challenge for people to get to Windows 10 as well. Recently, Microsoft has just changed the game. So there's we've altered our guidance a little bit in what we're advising people on how to get to Windows 10 using UEFI, so that they can take advantage of all of these wonderful security features. So What we recommend today is just as a general guidance is that you want to get to Windows 10. That can be with an in-place upgrade if that's possible, even if you're still running BIOS. Because what's going to happen is that once that creators update comes out here a little bit later on in the spring, there's going to be a built-in utility. It's already available in the Windows Insider Preview. So if you're somebody that likes to mess around with this stuff, you can get access to this functionality today in the preview rings. But what it'll do is it will allow you to do an in-place conversion of get a little technical here. So, go from MBR or master boot record to GPTs or the global partition table. Please so. Yep. I probably should know my acronyms before I said that, but. So what but
GPT is required. It's
yes.
a requirement for you to get to UEFI.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. You cannot run MBR on a UEFI enabled system. So what that will allow you to do is it will allow you to, once you get to Windows 10 and once you get to this creators update, you will then be able to do a transition from MBR to GPT and then be able to turn on UEFI and you'd be able to take advantage of some of these security functionalities. Now, we have TPM 2.0 up here on the screen, just because if you have a device that is enabled for that, that's definitely best case scenario. And that is required for some of these features, particularly anything that requires something called health attestation. However, some of the more compelling features with Credential Guard and Device Guard, you can use TPM 1.2 system, and most people should have that available in their current environment.
Yeah, especially for enterprise systems. Yep. And so the call to action here is all new devices that you get, make sure that they at least have a TPM 2.0 chip. Yep. Right? Because that's a hardware-based thing that you just can't not replace on a device. You'd have to replace the entire device. But at the same time, get to Windows 10 as soon as possible, even if you're on BIOS, and then you can plan for that changeover to UEFI once the creators update comes out. So thanks for that, Chris. That was helpful. So getting away from hardware-rooted trust and the device itself, now secured identities, right? So passwords themselves are extremely, that's a big attack vector, as we saw, kind of stealing passwords, putting them in a malicious site, that type of thing. So with Windows 10, there's technologies to basically remove the need for passwords in general, or make it that password is not the only factor of authentication across enterprise scenarios. So really, with the target breach that we talked about is a perfect example of a breach that starts with the compromised user credentials. It's not the only one, though, as most breaches either start or use compromised credentials as a means to execute the attack, thus making it one of the biggest challenges that you're facing. So to address the problem, Microsoft believes that we need to enable mainstream two-factor authentication, make credentials theft and phish-proof, and keep them secured even when the data center or identity providers are breached. And we need to deliver a solution that is just as good and easy to use for consumers, and be able to use these credentials on or at least from any device, including non-Windows platforms. And Windows 10, that delivers on all these promises here. So with user identity authentication, let's just kind of understand how weak the industry's solutions today are and how urgently the move is to move to the new ones. So what's the problem with usernames and passwords? Well, they're shared secrets is what you'd call them. They can be easily mishandled or lost. Think about those users that write down their passwords on a sticky note and put it under their keyboard. They can be guessed. They can be given to somebody. Somebody can impersonate you from anywhere in the world. So the solution to the problem is well known. It's okay, deploy a two-factor authentication solution. But as mentioned earlier, they're typically pretty complex and they're costly to provision. So as well, the sites that we use are a weak link. And think about this from the standpoint of passwords. Users are going to try to do what's easiest to get their work done. And a lot of times with passwords, they'll use the same passwords for multiple things, like including, maybe their Active Directory password is the same as their banking password, is the same as their social network password, because it's easier for them to remember, right? So attackers know this, and so what they'll do is they'll look at these sites here. Users use a bunch of different sites. I mean, think about how many websites that you have to create a username and password for these days. And attackers will look at all these sites and say, all right, let me look at the weakest link here. What's the easiest one that I could breach, and take all those passwords from that. And they can get all these username and password combinations, and because actually it's like 75% of those combinations are used across a large body of sites, the attackers quite likely can access those users' Facebook's accounts, Facebook and bank accounts, and get further information about those users. So then they can also get down to getting to enterprise level stuff as well if they're using the same type of password. So credentials and shared secrets themselves are insecure. So in contrast, organizations typically require their users in the enterprise space to use complex passwords, and they force them to reset them periodically. So that is that makes it a little bit more difficult, right, to get those credentials, right? But there's also the phishing attacks that users will typically just give out the username and password to a site that looks like it's legitimate, or maybe they're pressured into doing something that they didn't realize is not legitimate, and they just gave away their credentials, and now somebody owns their credentials, get into whatever they had access to. So that's one path. So then the other thing is, all right, let's, instead of just complex passwords and making reset them all the time, let's just do an encrypted operating system, right? Well, that's good as well. You know, that does protect against lost and stolen devices, and someone being able to get in and crack passwords potentially from those devices. But again, that doesn't protect against all the attacks of those shared credentials getting out somehow. So it really comes down to the user and the device are the weak links. So oftentimes, to start off with for multi-factor authentication, you need some sort of something in the background kind of certifying that you are, you know, that second factor. And it's usually certificates and use PKI solutions. However, as we've seen a lot, they're very complex, costly, and they're really under attack these days as well. What happens with this is that basically the attack here, and it's a single point of failure as well, because if the attacker can take control of your CA, your certificate authority, it's game over. All your identities will be compromised, and your entire network can come under their control if you're using these certificates across your network. So imagine attackers using your CA to issue themselves valid certificates or smart cards, and it's exactly the thing that they do. So this is just kind of going through how certificates work and how they're issued. And yeah, once the attacker has certificate authority, they have access to network resources, devices, Active Directory, kind of game over at that point. So because of that, PKI is very complex to put in place. It's expensive, and the challenge, though, is usability. So these solutions for multi-factor don't really work on the types of devices we're using. So like mobile phones, tablets, ultrabooks, they don't have built-in smart card readers. So the only way to use that is either a USB-based reader, some bulky jacket or sleeve device. And who's going to do that? You know, we don't see customers doing that at all. So typically you say, okay, well maybe they just use multi-factor to get to VPN, but now you're ignoring all the rest of the threats out there, because they're just going to use the username and password to access file servers, OneDrive, email, and wireless, for example. So the enterprise has demanded, well, we need a simple implementation of multi-factor authentication, but we also need it to reduce costs. Well, this is where Windows 10 really comes in. They made it very simple to deploy multi-factor to devices, and even can work with turning the device you already own and turn that into another factor of authentication. So you can even use your PC or even your mobile phone as a credential. It really turns your mobile phone potentially into something that you have, or even the device that you're in front of. It can basically be registered and be the device, be one of those factors of authentication because it's a familiar device. And that's where the TPM chip comes into play, is that ensures that the device is trusted and that it hasn't been tampered with. So PKI and certificates can be used for that as well, but the new way of doing this, and it's even more secure and less costly and complex, is key-based authentication. It doesn't depend on PKI at all, and it provides increased security, as the keys used for authentication can only exist and be used on the user's original device. So even if the data center has been breached, There's no risk of the user credentials being stolen at all. So basically, that user proves its identity to your IDP or identity provider, sends trusts a unique key. It says, here's my unique key for my device. The IDP sends an authorization token to your device, and then that can be used on an internet resource, for other areas for SSO within your organization. Now, a PIN is also another way that you can even get around having to type in the password and making that something that can be breached. You can use a PIN to unlock the container that contains your credential, or you can also use a biometric option like your fingerprint. So Windows 10 supports PINs as a default, but if you do have biometric sensors, you can use that in place of it. And Windows Hello is where that biometrics come into play, and that can be fingerprint, it can be retinal scan, it can be the face detection, and those are stored only on the device itself. But a lot of customers ask, well, how can a PIN be more secure than a password? PIN's only, maybe it's just a few digits or something like that, and it's way less complex. Well, the thing is, the attacker would both need to know your PIN and have access to your device, because your PIN is tied to the device itself. It won't work on any other device. The TPM chip, which is very important, remember, it provides anti-hammering support to thwart offline attacks. If somebody was to steal your device and try to just hammer at it and guess your PIN, it actually can prevent that. And these are hardware-bound keys that cannot be stolen or replayed. Again, TPM comes into that as well. And the PIN is never stored in the device or sent to the server. It's on a TPM chip. It's anywhere else it can be used. It's just being authenticated, and then it unlocks the credentials there. So an identity for the business here, the idea is that you can get to a world beyond passwords and have two-factor authentication that works really well, easy to implement, is easy to use, either through BIN or biometric plus your device, and this is where Windows 10 has a lot of this built in. It can prevent the breach, theft, and phishing proof, and phish-proof your identities. Provide that single sign-on as well to the rest of those resources in your enterprise, and then you sign in devices as well using Azure Active Directory, which we'll get into a little bit later. So solving the password or the credential problem is one challenge that needs to be addressed, but there's another identity-related challenge that is just as important, or maybe more so. This is what is called derived credentials, which is what you use after you authenticate with your user credential and traverse the network and access resources. So your password doesn't go traveling across the network when you're accessing a file share or whatever else. It's typically some sort of token or hash of that, which is used as derived from your user password in order to give you that single sign-on to the rest of those resources in the organization. So you don't have to re-authenticate with your user credentials every time you attempt to access a resource. So I think we're going to turn this over to Chris and just talk a little bit about some of the attacks involved with this and how to prevent them.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go over an overview of some of these attack vectors, and I'll tell a kind of a scary story here of a attack in use using these that I've seen in quite a large organization. So talking about pass the hash and pass the hash attacks. So to an attacker, stealing a user's derived credentials is just as interesting as keylogging their username and password. Gives the attacker the user's full access. In this case, they can just be you without even knowing your username or password. In a way, it's a bypass for all user credentials types, including all MFA solutions. Is when I steal your derived credential, I'm effectively transitioning into a pre-authenticated state. So theft and use of derived credentials is what Microsoft calls pass the hash. And this type of attack is part of a playbook of virtually every notable network breach. And it's used in coordination with most ATPs. You'll hear that acronym thrown out there. So that's an advanced persistent threat. And the tactic enables an attacker to hide from detection, and frequently it gives them the opportunity to acquire more than just credentials. From here, they can transition from one identity to the next, or if IT detects that a specific user's credentials have been compromised. So today's security challenge. So a typical pass the hash attack starts with one endpoint being compromised through either a vulnerability exploit, malware, or both, which has given the attacker admin level access. With this access, the malware can steal the user's derived credential and move to other devices on the network and impersonate the user from there. So as the attacker moves laterally across the network and finds additional devices, they may be able to steal credentials of other users who have previously signed into those devices. Over time, an attacker typically gains access to a large set of some of these increased level privileges on devices and the network. Eventually, it's likely that a domain admin account can be compromised, and then you know what happens next. So I'll tell you a quick story of an organization that I was able to see this successfully used on, where it was thankfully a penetration test. So it wasn't. It was more of a, this is just a drill. If this was real life, things would have been really bad. But this is a large organization that it's on the Fortune 500 list. You've heard of it, and it's they're quite large in the dozens of billions of dollars of revenue. And what had happened was the attackers had scraped a couple of usernames and passwords or names from LinkedIn of people that worked at the company, and sent out a handful of spam emails that had a malicious download in there. So the users, a handful of users clicked on the download, and a fair amount of them actually had local admin rights on their machine. So that malicious payload, it launched, it created a secure shell outbound where it connected to a command and control server, where since the user had admin access and some of these security technologies hadn't been implemented yet, the user or the malicious actor was able to essentially gain full access to the network within about 2 hours. So how they did that? Very simple. They had in a system that does not utilize Credential Guard, so such as Windows 7, once the user had admin access to the machine, he was able to drop that SAM database and run a dictionary-based attack against the local admin passwords. No matter what, that's going to happen fairly quickly. You can usually run a rainbow table against that, and you're able to crack that even with complex passwords without too much time. After they had done that, they were able to use that local admin password and use the hash of that to be able to traverse the network until they found a machine that had a domain admin hash in there. Once they had that domain admin hash, they essentially were able to have domain admin rights. So within about 2 hours of sending the emails, the attackers, if they had been fully malicious, would have essentially owned an organization that spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on separate and distinct point security solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep, that really illustrates the point that this is even the largest companies with the really high budgets. These are very simple attacks but they can be prevented as well. Kind of talk through some of this here. There's Mimikatz, you might hear of. That's a tool that can be used to steal that hash, the hash of the password. And yeah, the solution really that stops everything in its tracks for these attacks, just fundamentally just prevents these current forms of attacks, is called Credential Guard. That's built into Windows 10, and that is something that is a fundamental just architectural change. And that essentially what it does here, you want to explain that real quick, Chris?
Sure. You guys probably recognize this slide from before. So you see here on the left in the green, so Chris, if you want to click through one more, you're going to have Credential Guard running as one of these trustlets. So what happens is that those local admin hashes and the domain credential hashes, those would be stored here behind virtualization-based security. So that way, like I said before, even if you assume that the apps, the Windows platform services, and the kernel itself can and will be compromised, like it was in that situation where a user had local administrative rights, those hashes and those sensitive aspects of the operating system were protected based on hardware. So if that attack would have been run against a Windows 10 machine that was using Credential Guard, they would not have been able to use or been able to get access to the hashes of the domain-based the domain-based user accounts.
Yeah, and Credential Guard, just to reiterate too, that is a Windows 10 Enterprise feature. So that's why Windows 10 Enterprise does include a lot more security features, and that's definitely something to consider for your organization. So a complementary solution there. Now we talked about that's Credential Guard. That's protecting the domain secrets and the hashes of your domain user accounts. But also in that same attack scenario, said, you know, the local administrative password was compromised on the device, and a lot of times because it's easy, IT organizations probably put this typically the same local admin password across all the devices because there's not usually a really good way of randomizing that typically that they know of. So I want to introduce everybody to kind of one of the best kept secrets from Microsoft, probably right next to Office Telemetry Dashboard. That's a different show though. Is LAPS. So why don't you quickly tell us about that, Chris? And I think there's a couple of things you can show on that, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So LAPS. So this is called a Local Administrator Password Solution. So to give a little bit of history as far as how this product came about, you know, go back in time here a couple of years. Those of us that are Active Directory administrators, we probably remember being able to set a local admin account and a local admin password using group policy. So unfortunately, this turned out to be a quite insecure way to do this, as this essentially gave attackers the ability to know exactly where to look in your sysfall to where your local admin password and your local admin accounts were being generated from. So we basically gave attackers the keys to the kingdom and told them exactly where it was. So Microsoft deprecated that ability a couple of years back, and in its place they implemented something called LAPS. So what this does, like Chris said, it's a free tool. It goes through the slide here, so it provides a centralized storage of secrets and passwords in AD. Doesn't require any additional infrastructure. Let's see, so it'll periodically randomize your local administrator passwords, which ensures that the password update to AD succeeds before it modifies local secrets or passwords. So Credential Guard does not supersede LAPS. Credential Guard protects domain admin accounts and not local admin accounts. So let me, actually, if you want to switch over and put me as a presenter, I can go through a quick demo here. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So what I have here is a Windows 10 VM on a test domain I have running up in Azure, and I can show you a couple of the components of LAPS. So some of the things that you do with LAPS is you'll first have to extend your schema to add a handful of attributes onto computer accounts within your environment, and then you can run a handful of PowerShell scripts to give some delegation of authority as far as who has the ability to view and to set and to see these. So. And then there's a client. It's a small MSI that you can deploy out to all of the systems. So you can do both clients, you can do servers. And what this will do is this will manage and rotate all of your local administrator passwords without you having to know the passwords and without having a separate, unique password on every single machine. So what it does, and I'll show you just a couple of components here, is I've run the LAPS agent here, and I've set a group policy to set a unique password here. So you can see here on this is the computer account here for this machine. It's called Windows 10, and if you look at the attributes, you see this admin password here, a very unique password. It's non-dictionary based. You can make this fairly complex. You can make this up to I think 24 or 30 characters, so it can be fairly complex. It's very secure. However, you may be thinking, well, what happens if a machine falls off the domain and I need to give a user this password? What happens then? My help desk needs to have this. What you can do, and over here on the left-hand side, you've got a GUI, and you can give this GUI to any of your help desk people, anybody you'd want to be able to have access to any individual computer's local admin password. So if I type in the name of my computer, what it's going to do, it's going to query Active Directory, and it's going to return back the local admin password. And you can see here it's the same value as what's stamped on this on the computer object. So so I'm logged in as a domain admin, so I can see this this password by default. A normal user without any elevated rights would not even have access to view these two fields. If you logged on as a user account that didn't have this those rights, then you can delegate these rights out to a group. They would not be able to see this. So last thing before I pass it back over to Chris here is that you can actually change your expiration time here. So if I were to set my expiration time to, let's say we'll call this an hour ago, hit set, and then reboot, what will happen is that when the machine boots up and as it processes the group policy, it will actually change the local admin password locally. It'll stamp it in the Active Directory, and then it'll confirm, it'll send an acknowledgement back, and it'll finalize the transaction back on the local PC. And now that password's changed, so if I had to give the user the password, I can set it to expire within a day, within a week, immediately. The next time that they reboot or the next time group policy refreshes, that local administrator account will be changed and will be unique again. All right, pass it back over to Chris.
Yep, and a couple key things there is that that is a free solution, and that works even backwards to Windows 7. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10. So this is a solution that it should be, like, if you don't have it in there, you put it now. And that really can stop a lot of those basic attacks from happening. So let's quickly go through a couple of things here. We don't have much time left. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So from a security standpoint, there's a lot of cloud-enabled services now that can help bring other aspects of security that you just cannot do on-prem yourself, just because of the nature of those, the information that is included with those. So in general, I'm not going to go to this too much, but cloud services security is a shared responsibility. I know a lot of organizations are doing things like implementing Office 365. You might have all sorts of things, Salesforce.com, you might have Box, you might have AWS, Azure, whatever. But the thing is that you're not just absolved from all areas of security within those services. There are certain pieces of that you are responsible for that the service provider really can't provide for you in that area. So you really have to understand at what point do you need to be making sure things are secure. And where Microsoft is very unique is that they have this thing called an intelligent security graph, which aggregates signals, let's call them, from all sorts of different services that they own across Office 365, Azure AD, even their consumer services like Bing and Outlook.com and Xbox Live, all the hacking attempts and botnets and malicious stuff going online, and they aggregate that with industry partners. It might be Symantec, it might be Google. Everybody's working together to pull these together, and Microsoft also has teams dedicated to going out and finding malicious attacks and aggregating this all together, and it impacts. This is all brought together to help secure identity, your apps, data, infrastructure, the devices that you have, and all these services that Microsoft offers through Office 365, Enterprise Mobility and Security, which I'll mention a little bit later, Azure AD. It uses all these signals to help you better protect, detect, and respond to attacks. So Enterprise Mobility and Security, just like it says, it's meant for helping you be mobile. And mobility now is not just the device, the data, it's really the experience, right? And being able to take that experience and the identity of the user and use it on their enterprise device or their home device, their BYOD device, their mobile device, get to their data and their applications access from anywhere, anytime. And more users are kind of demanding this, and a lot of organizations are maybe hesitating, resisting that because they don't know how to control that data. Well, this is a way to do that. This is a way to keep your users productive while keeping all that information secure at the same time. So there's multiple components here. We'll touch on a few. The key one is going to be Azure AD. Is kind of the cornerstone and the foundation of all the identity across these devices. And that is typically, if you have Active Directory, which most organizations do, you would synchronize certain attributes, your user names and some attributes, to Microsoft Azure Active Directory and have some sort of a authentication methodology, whether it's a hash of your password or it's ADFS, where you're actually authenticating directly to your on-prem AD, in a way that you're kind of connecting these identities together and being able to use a lot of these capabilities that only are available through the cloud. So with Azure Active Directory, it is being used by a lot of organizations, more than 10 million. There's more than 750 million user accounts in Azure AD, 1.3 billion authentications every day. It is the enterprise cloud authentication and identity provider. It really is. And every Office 365 customer, Microsoft Azure customer, uses Azure Active Directory as well. So there's a lot of scenarios that Azure Active Directory provides It's SSO, managing identities, some conditional access. We're going to touch on a couple of them. One is that you can synchronize, like I said, your identities between on-prem and Azure Active Directory, and you can provide single sign-on to other applications, and that ensures that the users are logging into your systems to get to other applications, and you can see those logins, you can report on that, you can prevent breaches from happening, and also if the user was to leave or something was to happen, you can cut off access as well. That works for both in the cloud and on-prem applications, so SaaS apps and on-prem. Let's go into the other thing that it does provide is some identity protection where you can actually have conditional-based access of, with the devices outside the network. Maybe you're going to require to use multi-factor authentication or just block completely from using like an HR app, for example, because you only want it to be used inside the network. Or based off the device state, as long as it's registered and it's a trusted device and it's free of malware, yes, you can access our application, the enterprise applications and data. It's even extended with Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, which is, it calculates risk severity based off of the login, the IP address that's coming from. This is using that intelligent security graph to look at, is that a known botnet? Is that from an anonymous IP address? Is that from a different part of the world that it'd be impossible to travel to in 5 minutes from the last login that you had successfully? And those are, all kind of aggregated together, and you can enforce multi-factor authentication, block the account, and prevent completely those attacks from compromising your credentials. Privileged identity management, I won't go into this too deeply, but this is to help your admins of your cloud services, especially Office 365 and Azure, to, instead of having to enforce multi-factor authentication every time that they try to log in and even to view their email or to do admin stuff, tasks, this will just give them just enough privileges and just enough time, just in time for what they need to do. So it's time-bound, and then enforces multi-factor authentication when they need to do something elevated, but all the other times are just the default user. Great technology. And we're just going to go through this real quickly. There's some other webinars we've done that's gone through advanced threat analytics. This is one of the pieces of EMS that is the least cloud-based, because this is actually implemented on-prem. And the idea here is that it can very quickly see from the logins across your Active Directory what's malicious. It can see those past the hash attacks happening, those signature-based attacks, but it can also, the secret sauce I think is really the behavioral-based attacks of things that seem a little off, of a user doesn't typically log on at this time, then they're logging in. And there's a lot of noise typically with other solutions that you could be staring at a screen like the Matrix all day and you're not going to get any actionable data. What this does is it pulls everything together into a timeline that seemingly isolated events can be correlated, and you can see a clear attack timeline and go backwards, detect quicker, respond quicker to these attacks, so minimizing these modern attacks from having any impact on your organization. So this is included in EMS. This is fairly straightforward to install as well. We're going to skip the demo, we're running out of time here, sorry. But just a slide on enterprise mobility and security and some of the things that are available there. Couple things we didn't touch on was Microsoft Cloud App Security, which allows you to extend your security to all your SaaS apps and use in your organization. Azure Information Protection allows you to protect your data everywhere, no matter where it's at. Those are also things to look into. Quick slide on enterprise mobility and security. There's 2 levels now. There's EMS E3, which used to be the only EMS there was, and E5 adds some additional capabilities, which are more like, I characterize them as more automated response, more dynamic capabilities, and a little bit more in-depth reporting and classification. So we touched on a lot, but there's so much more. Honestly, so much more. We're going to have like 2 or 3 more webinars probably to dig into the rest. Just a real quick idea of things that you should be looking at. Azure Information Protection I mentioned was encryption of those files. You can track usage and revoke access to files with rights management. Exchange Online Advanced Threat Protection, that's just additional protection for emails coming in and stops a lot of phishing attacks from happening. Operations Management Suite is an Azure-based service, which there's a lot to that. I think we're going to have a webinar on just that itself. But that helps with security and compliance, automation, and log analytics. Azure Security Center is kind of built in here too and touches all of these cloud services. And I touched on these last couple.
Sure. Yeah. So Windows 10 Enterprise E5. So there's a couple flavors of Windows 10 Enterprise. E3 is typically what you're probably familiar with. Microsoft recently added a new SKU, and what that gives you is going to be Windows Defender ATP. So what that is, so that's Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. It is and I said we're going to have an entire webinar just on this product itself. Consider this a post-breach analysis tool. So in the event that you are breached, what this will do is this will allow you to track every single action that that malware takes as it establishes persistence and moves across devices, and it will allow you to isolate and even remediate some of these malware infestations directly from this cloud service. So definitely stay tuned for some more information on that one. Server 2016, there's a lot of great security functionality it's been implemented in 2016. There's privilege access management. There's just enough administration. So really just giving your administrators, not domain admin, but it gives you the ability to limit what they have access to. If they only need access to DNS, then you give them access to just access DNS. Just-in-time administration, so that's going to be elevating your rights only for a certain amount of time, because you don't necessarily need to be a domain admin 24/7. You just need to be an admin when you need to do administrative tasks. And another one, Hyper-V protected VMs. This is a great way to secure your virtualization fabric from potentially malicious activities that could be going on from the network, from the storage, and within the actual hypervisor itself. So stay tuned for more information on those. We'll have further sessions.
Absolutely. So we talked about a lot of security aspects here. It really drives home the point that you need to look at everything. It's a holistic approach for that. And Windows 10 is definitely helping to mitigate a lot of these modern attacks. So getting down to it, first of all, I want to see, do we have any questions?
Yeah, it looks like we have a few questions. I'll go ahead and read the first one, and you guys can take over the rest from there, depending on the time that we have. Do you have to have enterprise Windows licenses to use LAPS?
No, you do not. So LAPS is something that doesn't have any hardware or operating system SKU level dependence. So you can use that Windows 7 on up.
As long as it can connect to your Active Directory.
Correct.
So meaning professional and up, most likely.
Correct. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah. So as long as it's an you do not need an enterprise SKU to use LAPS. So you can use Windows 10 Professional, Windows 7 Professional.
Absolutely.
8.1.
Great question.
Yep.
Well, here's another one real quick is how much effort does it take to install LAPS in ATA?
Sure. Yeah. So we've got a project in flight right now where it's to give you a sense of size and scale, because every a big asterisk on here. Every customer is different depending on complexity, how many domains, how many domain controllers, architecture, etc. That we're looking at. It's about a 1,000-seat company with probably a little over a dozen domain controllers. We're looking at probably about a week's worth of effort from a consulting effort to help them install ATA and LAPS. However, every customer is a little bit different.
Yeah, so relatively minimal effort to implement that, and huge returns, huge value there. So definitely something to look into. I think that's all the questions we had today. Just a quick slide here of how CoreTech can help you with kind of your journey here with security. Is we can help you accelerate your Windows 10 deployment, help you understand from a planning perspective which security features are most important to you, and planning out your entire deployment, no matter what tools that you're using, helping you pilot and even deployment support. We can provide some security briefings if you want to go deeper into any of these subjects, and also with any of the cloud-based security solutions, we can help with proof of concepts and pilot. So if you want to know more, check out us on our website, coretechservices.com. There's our main number. Feel free to reach out to Chris Barnes here or myself, Chris Schulda. If you have any questions, we always welcome any sort of questions. Any help that we can provide will definitely be helpful with that. All right, so thank you everybody for joining today. Hopefully this was enlightening and there wasn't too much information overload, but hope we drive home the point that security needs to be on top of mind for everybody. We're starting to see that trend this year is like the year of security. So start addressing these things now, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. We'll be sending out this recording shortly for you guys to review, and I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.